Welcome back to the STLK in the UTA Cougars Podcast. I'm Paul, joined by Steve once again. BYU is traveling to West Virginia to play the Mountaineers in a Big 12 game. First time playing them in the Big 12. West Virginia is favored by 11. Steve, we played West Virginia, I want to say in 2016. Is that right? And you were at that game.
I was at the game in 2016, working for the team on the equipment staff, also as an offensive line assistant, the coach's assistant for the offensive line. So it was one of those weird independence, neutral site games, right? Where Tom Homo says, hey, we want to play you. You know, we're not going to get a home and home, but we'll do a neutral site that's closer to your field than ours, right? So West Virginia to DC, just a few hour drive. And so we played at FedEx Field where the Redskins played at the time, now the Commanders, obviously. And it was a wild game. And that was a stacked team as well. If you remember back to 2016, we had guys like Fred Warner, Tijon Karoma. We had big time receivers like Kurtz, right? Taysom's obviously the quarterback that year. We have Jamal Williams, right? A really stacked roster. And it was a really fun game. In the fourth quarter, with about 10 minutes left, BYU's down big. It was 35-19. So we're down by 16 points. We had chased a couple 2-point conversions earlier on in the game. BYU comes back. It kind of goes back and forth. Taysom throws a pick. It looks like the game's going to be over. They're on the 5-yard line about to score and put it away. Their center snaps the ball when the quarterback's not ready. They fumble. BYU gets it back, drives the length of the field, and unfortunately, Taysom throws a pass in the red zone that hits off of Aleva Hifo's hands, a freshman at the time, and West Virginia picks it off to win 35-32. But yeah, a very fun game, an exciting game, kind of a callback to independence and some of the games we had back then, but looking forward to the rematch this weekend.
Yeah, so BYU travels there as, like I said, 11-point underdogs, which is really, really high. If you know anything about points, BYU is 5-3 on the year. West Virginia 5-3 on the year. BYU's 2-3 in conference play. West Virginia's 3-2. It looks like these teams on paper are very, very similar. Why do you think West Virginia is favored by so much?
When I saw the line open originally, I believe it was 8.5. So it appears to have slid towards West Virginia. Maybe some of the bettors saw what BYU laid an egg at Texas this week. But West Virginia is a formidable team. Actually, in the Big 12 Media Day this summer, the coaches picked West Virginia to finish last in the conference. And their coach got up there and he said, I promise you we will not be the last team in the conference this year. And to their credit, they've had a good start to the year. Coach Neil Brown, he came over from Troy in 2019. They've kind of been a mid-tier team since then. His records overall 5-7, then 6-4 during the COVID year. They were 6-6 last year. They were 5-7 again, and so they haven't been able to break out of that mid-tier. But yeah, to see BYU in Morgantown as 11-point dog, again, a bit discouraging. But you know, with how we closed the game in Austin, it's hard to blame Vegas for that line.
Well, I mean, any team would have kind of lost to Texas in that fashion, right? I mean, we saw Texas handle a handful of teams this year. I don't think BYU got blown out, or at least proportionally blown out. Do you?
I don't think. I mean, like we talked about on Tuesday, it was a 2-score game in the fourth quarter, so it wasn't over early, right?
No, BYU that's all you can ask for any team, right?
BYU's in the game, but you look at the flip side. You look at West Virginia. Over the past 3 games, they're averaging 38 points a game, and so they've really started to turn it on here.
That's a lot.
Yeah, they had a rough start to the beginning of the season, and it really feels like they're starting to hit their stride. West Virginia is a team that they're not a flashy team. They're more of a grinded out physical type team. They don't have the best run efficiency, but they sure run the ball a lot.
So one thing I saw on the stats that I was looking at last night, they have 3 separate running backs, and I'm not sure if they're all listed as running backs, but every game they have 3 guys going 50 yards plus. And again, to your point, they're all rushing 20 plus times or something like that, but they have a lot of guys who can run the ball and really just pound it inside. That's going to be really hard for BYU to defend the entire length of the game.
And they have a couple big physical runners. They also have a speed guy that comes in to kind of mix up the look that BYU's defense will see. But yeah, like I said, not the most efficient team rushing the ball, but they go back to the rush and they go back to the rush. They're not one of those teams that if they don't run the ball well early, they're going to give up and move on to the passing game. And so give them credit. They've been a very physical team. It's kind of, the West Virginia mindset, the Morgantown mindset. Coach Kelly Papinga this week on Coordinator's Corner mentioned that there's a little bit of Laramie in Morgantown, right? A little bit of that blue collar feel. And the fans, I think definitely, they have a great fan base, by the way. I should have mentioned that. Thinking back to the game 7 years ago that I was at, their fans are pretty crazy. They were there really early. I believe it was a noon kickoff for the last game, but they have a great fan base that's incredibly passionate. I don't imagine there's a ton to do in Morgantown, and so everybody gets up for the 6 or 7 football games. They get at home every year, and I think it's going to be a pretty crazy environment. Fans are going to be excited about it.
The stadium can hold 60,000 people. I would assume they're going to sell that thing out pretty quickly for any game. Like you said, at home, no one's really on a Saturday night is doing anything other than watching football probably. That's going to be a really tough place to play.
It is going to be tough to place. And interestingly, West Virginia is a way better team at home than they are on the road. Let me share some stats that I found. Yards per game allowed when they're on the road, they're giving up 440 yards a game. That's a lot of yards. BYU hasn't even hit 400 yards this year, by the way.
I wish they were coming to Provo.
When they're at home, they only give up 315 yards. Points per game, when they're on the road, they give up 27. At home, only 21. And then takeaways per game, when they're on the road, they're only averaging 1. But when they're at home, 1.8 takeaways. And so West Virginia, in front of their fans, their fan base, and their home stadium is a much better team than they are when they're away from home.
That is a really big difference. Something you don't see a lot. It's in any sport, any road-home splits that big is enough to cause concern if you're on the road. They're at home. Kind of makes me nervous as a BYU fan. As far as BYU goes, and I hope this isn't too shocking to you, but I'm hearing rumblings from people on the team that Jake Retzlaff is going to be starting for the BYU Cougars this Saturday. Excuse me. He's been taking the majority of the first team snaps this week in practice. It looks like Slovis was either hurt last week or hurt early in the week in practice. What can we expect to see from the redshirt junior, top JUCO quarterback in the nation last year? What can we expect to see from him this week?
One of the best quarterback transfers in the portal. Obviously, he came from the JUCO ranks, so he didn't get all the hype of guys like Keaton Slovis and others. But BYU landed 2, and a lot of fans forget this in the offseason. Coach A-Rod, he landed 2 huge quarterback transfers here. Obviously, Keaton and then Jake Retzlaff as well. He's a mobile guy. He's a dual threat quarterback. I've been watching his film this week. He's got an impressive arm. You know, there's a little bit of Pat Mahomes in him where he can dance around the pocket and kind of sling his sidearm. He can get outside of the pocket and make the defense respect the run. And as I was watching highlights of the game 7 years ago when BYU went to West Virginia, it was Taysom Hill, obviously, right? And every time Taysom dropped back, they had 1 or 2 spies watching Taysom, right? And that's something that we haven't seen this year with Keaton, right? Keaton is a pocket passer. He sits in the pocket. He surveys the field. Sometimes he escapes the pocket and then throws it away, right? There's never really been a threat of quarterback scramble. And so I'm looking forward, as Jake, as we're hearing, is going to start this game, to the defense probably being surprised. They weren't expecting this, right? They were probably expecting Keaton to be the starter.
I doubt they're expecting it, but like you mentioned earlier, the line moving all the way from 8 to 11 does indicate that this has already been released in some form or some facet where Vegas at least knows about it. So I wouldn't be surprised if West Virginia knows about it, but keep going.
Yeah, somehow Vegas knows everything. I don't get it.
They know before the coaches know.
Incredible at what they do. But yeah, Jake's a guy that's going to open up the field both vertically and horizontally. He can get outside the pocket. He can make plays with his feet. He can get those 6, 7, 8 yards. And we've been watching the BYU offense all year. It's just such a struggle to get yards, right? It just feels like the field is so tight and the pocket is so tight and the run game there's just not holes. And man, my hope when we see Jake this week is that because the defense is going to have to respect his legs, because BYU is going to be implementing different packages, right? That's another thing that we don't often talk about when a new quarterback comes in. There's going to be new formations. There's going to be new personnel groups. There's going to be new types of plays because of the type of quarterback that Jake is. And so looking forward to watching West Virginia's defense, likely in real time, having to respond to this new style of quarterback.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. On Tuesday, I made a Tom Brady reference talking about Jake Retzlaff, and this isn't to say he is Tom Brady, but it is to say from the offensive players I've spoken to throughout the week that know he is starting, there's a lot of excitement. And there's a lot of almost like a first game of the season jitters where it's like, I'm really, really excited to see what this guy can do for our offense. And truth be told, as much as people don't want to admit it, that impacts how an offense plays. The receivers are going to run harder. The running backs are going to run harder. The offensive line is going to block it a little bit longer because they know this guy can extend the plays. I'm really excited to see how this turns out.
And I thought on Texas, the offensive line did a formidable job keeping the pocket for Keaton. There's a couple times where he was rushed. There was a couple sacks, obviously. But for the most part, it seemed like Keaton had the time. He just wasn't hitting the open receivers.
Yep.
And so with Jake on the field this week, I think, like we talked about, him with the ability to scramble, that makes an offensive lineman's job so much easier. When you know that your quarterback is mobile enough to avoid those sacks, right? It's a lot easier. So one of the things that happens is, like, let's say there's a tackle and an edge or a D end, right? And he's coming out the outside, right? When you have a pocket passer, you know he's going to be sitting in the pocket, right? Whereas when you have a more mobile quarterback like Jake, that he can come up, he can come back, he can step up, he can step to the side. And so it makes the job of an offensive lineman much easier as well. And so look for the BYU offensive line to have a better day pass blocking, just just given that Retzlaff can do a little bit more with his feet.
Yeah, and that's something really to watch as well. Just because like you said, he can extend plays. But something we saw against Texas, they were in a lot of man coverage, and we couldn't create separation with our receivers. And that happens. They have a whole bunch of 5-stars on those defensive backs. It's going to happen. But when they're in man coverage and they don't have a spy, that means we're able to just sneak the quarterback out and let him go for 6 or 7 yards. And that's something we didn't clearly have confidence in Slovis doing. That's not his strength, but it is for Retzlaff. So I'm really excited to see if they are playing man coverage. And I'm not sure, maybe you know what West Virginia plays mostly. But if they are and the receivers can't get open, it's going to force them to be a lot more honest with how they're watching the quarterback as he runs for 6 or 7 yards every few plays.
Coach A-Rod said this week on Coordinator's Corner that Texas was the best defense they played this year and probably the best defense he's ever faced as an offensive coordinator, right? And he's been an offensive coordinator at the FBS level for a long time now, right?
Almost 80 years.
Yeah. He said the second best team was Washington back when they made the playoff a few years back when Coach A-Rod was at Utah. And so Texas was a really impressive defense. And we've probably forgotten that a little bit this week as we recap the Texas game and the offensive woes that, man, there are studs all over the field for Texas. Obviously, West Virginia isn't to that level. But again, they're a team that takes pride in the way that they play. They feed off their fans, especially at home. They get takeaways when they're at home. They're a physical team. And so BYU is definitely going to have to win the trenches battle. I will say on the other side as well, Coach Kelly Papinga said this week on Coordinator's Corner that the West Virginia offensive line is likely the best offensive line they will face this week. And so we talked about the rushing game that West Virginia has, the grinded out type rushing game. We need guys like Tyler Batty to step up in a big way this week. I think that the second level of the linebackers are going to play a big role. Obviously, since Ben Bywater went down, we've seen kind of a mix of Ali Sarah, I believe his name is number 54, the big freshman, as well as Harrison Taggart. And I think they've both done a good job mixing it up there in the middle of the field. But yeah, that front seven is really going to have to be able to control the line of scrimmage, to slow down the West Virginia run game, to not let them be the time possession team that they have been. I think I mentioned they're fourth in the country in time possession.
You didn't. That is an important stat to watch.
Getting the ball back to the offense, getting the ball back to Jake Retzlaff's hands, and giving the Cougars the ability to go down and score.
As far as common opponents go, BYU has played Texas Tech and TCU. West Virginia has played Texas Tech and TCU. Texas Tech fell to both teams. 1 score to West Virginia, 2 scores to BYU. TCU beat BYU, what was it, 42-11?
I've forgotten. Put it out of my mind.
I think it's 42-11 or 41-11, something like that. And West Virginia actually beat TCU. So as far as
Fort Worth.
Yeah, that's a really impressive win. As far as that goes, they beat them, let's see, 24-21. So it's a narrow win. Game. It's a really close game. And then BYU lost to TCU the following week. So it's very similar teams they played. Does that mean anything going into this game, you think?
Honestly, I don't see it. The Big 12 this year has been so volatile, right? Oklahoma State early lost to I believe it was a Conference USA team at home, and it wasn't close. And you're like, oh man, Stillwater, like there's going to be problems with Coach Gundy, right? And now they've turned it on, right? And they're tied for first in the conference. West Virginia is a team that didn't look good and has gotten hot, right? And we see Iowa State, who looked really poor at the beginning of the season, who's gotten hot, and TCU's kind of fallen off. And so it's just been this up and down in the Big 12. So I don't put a lot of stock into that. You look at West Virginia's schedule. They lost early on to Penn State. Most teams would. They killed an FCS team. They did beat their rival Pitt in the backyard brawl, and I'm sure their fans are really hyped up about that. Maybe some of you remember that the Houston game, it was in Houston. This was Dana Holgorsen, the Houston head coach. He used to be the coach at West Virginia for quite a long time. You know, he's got the strangly hair, and he's kind of a crazy, erratic guy. But West Virginia went to Houston. West Virginia goes up with something like 50 seconds left in the game, and you think, okay, the game's over. And then Houston throws this long bomb, and somehow the coverage missed, and Houston ends up winning 41-39. It was a crazy last play of the game. And interesting fact, that's the only game a Big 12 newcomer has won in the conference besides BYU, right? BYU's won 2, and the only other one is when Houston barely beat West Virginia there. So then they lost to Oklahoma State by a touchdown, and then last week West Virginia played in Orlando and went down and beat the Knights of UCF 41-28.
As far as narratives go, I think one thing to really watch, I wouldn't even say narrative really, but the storyline to watch, the winner of this game becomes bowl eligible. You don't think these players care about this game, that this is a big deal. And these are two teams who I think both think they can beat each other. I don't think BYU looks at the 11-point dogs and thinks anything of it. And I don't think West Virginia looks at the favored by 11, and they're too confident in it. I think both teams think they can beat each other, but I think both know, like you said, it's going to be a real battle. So BYU plays Oklahoma State later on this year. If BYU loses this game to West Virginia, they're going into the Oklahoma State game knowing that West Virginia beat Oklahoma State they lost to Oklahoma State 48-34. That's kind of scary. If BYU can't pull out this win, we have a game against Oklahoma. We have a game against Oklahoma State.
One more against Iowa State.
Yeah, if we can't get the Iowa State game, we're in danger of not becoming bowl eligible. Are the players thinking about this game? You've been around the team before. Is this something that the coaches talk about? Like, give me your insight there.
So this was asked a couple of weeks to this week to a couple of players and coaches. All of them were giving the coach speak answer that we have one game this weekend and that's the only game that we care about, right? But the honest truth is that players do care about this, right? The bowl is an awesome, all-inclusive, paid-for vacation, right? So while I was working for the team, we went to the Vegas Bowl and we went to the San Diego Poinsettia Bowl, and this is a week-long trip for the players. They stay in a really nice hotel. The food's incredible. There's snacks everywhere. I remember we went to the Vegas Bowl and there was probably 6 or 7 86-inch TVs lined up with Xboxes, right? And the guys it's just like a guy's weekend. It's like a man cave, right, on steroids. Yeah. And so the players love it. Another thing that doesn't get mentioned often enough, when you make a bowl game, you get 15, 16, 17 more practices. And so a lot of your younger guys are having much more opportunity to develop, right? Mm-hmm. If you miss a bowl game, you don't get those extra practices. Everybody, the semester ends, everybody goes home early, and you miss out on development of your young players. And so, the coaches are saying, we care about West Virginia, bowl eligibility will come or it won't, but we're going to try to win this game this weekend. But I can tell you, I think the coaches absolutely care because of this player development. The players care because it's an all-inclusive vacation and a really good time at it. And usually some sort of destination, assuming we don't go to Shreveport.
That's Shreveport. Sure. I've been there, and it's not as bad as people say. They do have a lot of fun fast food restaurants down there. As far as like the guys weekend goes, that sounds incredible. It makes me want to go see if I can.
And I didn't even mention BYU Creamery Ice Cream Unlimited.
Really?
Just massive freezers full of Graham Canyon out of all of the best flavors.
Yeah, no, I think stuff. I could. I think I'm eligible. I could go try out for some D1 team out there. I want to hear your predictions. I know you're kind of nervous about this game, or at least we talked off air about that. I want to hear your predictions.
Yeah, I am. The 11-point dog scares me, right? If I were predicting this game, I think I would give West Virginia 3 or 4 points, right? Give them the home field advantage. To me, these teams seem pretty even. I think both teams are highly motivated in this game. The fact that it slid to 11 points is a little bit startling to me. However, I am excited about new quarterback, like we've been talking about, new changes on the offense, new opportunity for BYU to go out and prove that they are a Big 12 staple, right? They can compete week in and week out in this conference. Now, it is a long ways away, right? From Provo to Morgantown, that's a long trip. And it's not like it's you drop straight into Morgantown, right? I know a lot of fans that are going to the game. You have to go to Pittsburgh and then you have to make a drive, right? And you have to find a hotel to stay in kind of a small college town. And so it's kind of a weird place to get to. Historically, BYU has played quite poorly on the East Coast. We do not have a good record when we move 2 time zones. But one of the things going for BYU in this game is that it is a night game. Mm-hmm. It's been well chronicled. BYU's 20-1 in the last 21 night games. Yep. And so the game's also on Fox.
That's a big deal.
It's
right?
really exciting. Yeah. We went from ABC last week to Fox this week. Originally slated for FS1. The World Series ends early. Now BYU's on Fox.
It's a 5 p.m. kickoff, which again, we talked last week. That's just as prime time as you can get in college football. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a great slot for BYU. Another chance for national exposure. And so we'll see what happens as they get into Morgantown. It is going to be a raucous environment, and when you run out of backup quarterback, when you run out of a guy who hasn't played at this level, right? You watch his film, you watch Jake Retzlaff's film at the JUCO level, and there's a couple dozen people in the stands, right? Probably friends and family.
Utah high school football games are more
absolutely
packed, like way more packed. Like
right.
So Zach Wilson's younger brother, is playing against Lone Peak, one of the historically best high schools in the nation, in the state for football. And you just know for a fact it's going to be 10 times more packed than any game Jake Retzlaff.
So this is going to be an absolutely new experience for Jake and for this offense.
Yep.
And so we've been talking about it for weeks now. If BYU can get out to a hot start, if Jake gets out there and looks good, let's say we go down and score a touchdown on the first drive, something like that, man, it could be a fun day for the Cougars. But on the flip side of thing, if Jake gets rattled early and that home crowd, 60,000 people get into that game and they get loud and they get behind their guys, then it could be a long day for the Cougars. So I could see this game going either way. Let's hold off on my prediction till the end.
Okay, I was actually going to say, I am glad you said that because I know you have something on the Mountaineers. I had a buddy recently visit West Virginia. He said that the mascot matches it perfectly because everything out there is just a rolling hill. Like it's just hills and mountains. The Mountaineers. What do you have on the mascot?
Yeah, so I love live mascots. Well, last week when I was talking about live mascots, I was thinking of Bevo and Ralphie and a potential live cougar for BYU. I wasn't thinking about like a live human mascot, but that's exactly what West Virginia has. The West Virginia Mountaineers. So starting in the year 1930, excuse me, the student body selected one person to represent the school as the Mountaineer. And so you've probably seen before, he has the really long kind of old school rifle. He's wearing a buckskin outfit and a coonskin cap, right? And he's really energetic. He's the one that leads the team and the coaches out of the tunnel. Last week we saw Coach Sark that likes to lead his own team. Some teams have, a Buffalo leading them out. They're led out by the West Virginia Mountaineer. They've gone back and forth through the years. You used to have one student that could represent it for 2-3 years, and now back since 2018, they've just picked one student per year, and you only get 1 year to be the mascot. So should be exciting out there. I will say, I love the history of college football. Like you look back at the origins of the game of football, and it really started at the college level. West Virginia played their first football game on November 28th, 1891. So 130 some odd years ago, and they fell to a team called Washington and Jefferson, 72-0 on a converted cow pasture.
Wow.
So there's just a little college football.
They lost that game 72-0?
72-0. And they didn't even throw the ball back then. So that's just a lot of running yards.
They had the jump passes. I've seen film of it. Obviously, they didn't have film from the 1800s. But man, I wonder who the president was in 18.
Well, the team they played was Washington and Jefferson. So that's a good, bloodline
did
right there.
Did they fund their own? Anyway, we can get into that later. But yeah, that's incredible. BYU. If anyone from BYU is hearing this, can we please get a live cougar to lead us out?
We beg of you.
Yeah, put a couple leashes on him, maybe a couple people holding him.
If Texas can have a massive longhorn cow that's going to charge dogs that are on the other team, if Oklahoma has their schooner, and they run that thing out there and it tips over half the time, and everybody gets injured, and we got Uga. A cougar would be incredible. Throw a leash on it, that's fine.
Yeah, or even like one of those big body leashes. I'm sure we could work this out. Like, it's not too big of an ask.
This would never happen, but my dream is that you take a freshman from BYU, you release the cougar onto the field before the game.
Sure.
You take a freshman. The game doesn't start until the freshman hits him with the tranquilizer dart, so we can get the cougar off the game.
Do you know what? I really like that. If it wasn't putting the cougar in harm, because it's like, we are the Cougars. We want to
don't hurt ourselves.
Yeah, I'm like, we're not trying to hurt ourselves.
Let's talk about the Big 12 schedule.
Let's do it real fast.
Dropped yesterday. There were some leaks that were saying, hey, the schedule's coming out. I'm waiting in the morning. I'm waiting midday, and it finally comes out in the afternoon. Some good, some bad, some of what we expected. Some was a little interesting. A lot of the conferences have gone to these pod systems where each team has a pod of 3 or 4 teams that they play every year in and year out. Now, the Big 12 didn't announce a pod per se, but they did announce the next 4 years. And so we can kind of get a glimpse into what BYU's schedule looking forward is going to look like. So you have the schedule pulled up. What were your first insights when you saw who were playing?
Utah Utes. I'm really excited to play the Utah Utes.
Please, can this be a November, end of last game of the season type game? Call back to Mountain West days.
Yes.
When a lot of times the conference title was on the line that Thanksgiving weekend. It's freezing cold, right? It's probably snowing.
Like an 8:30 p.m. kickoff.
But both fans are just both sets of fans are just living for this game.
Yeah, I would love to see that game later in the year. I really like that we're playing Arizona and Houston and UCF. All 3 teams that are going to be newer to the conference next year. Arizona's going to be their first year in it. I feel like, in my opinion, that's 3 guaranteed wins for BYU next year.
Arizona's looked good to close the year. They almost beat USC. They beat number 15 Oregon State this weekend. So they're a team on the rise. But I had a similar thought. Those are some home games as well, right? We clip Arizona, and we get Kansas at home, Houston at home, Oklahoma State at home, and Kansas State at home. Kansas State obviously is a high caliber team, but those other games are absolutely winnable games at at LaVell Edwards Stadium.
So to your point, I'm just going to read off the home games, and I'll read off the road games for anyone that hasn't seen it yet. We play Arizona at home, Houston at home, Oklahoma State at home, Kansas, and Kansas State at home. On the road for the Big 12, the Utah Utes at Rice Eccles. Excuse me, you got me all confused now. I feel like that's going to be our hardest road game, because then we go Arizona State, Baylor, and UCF. I feel like whoever made the schedule really favored BYU with giving them their hardest opponents in Provo next year.
Yeah, we're lucky that way. I was really, really hoping to get Utah at home. Obviously, we had 2 games scheduled at Utah. They canceled one to play Florida, and then the COVID year, Utah wasn't playing football, and so that didn't happen. And so I was hoping to get Utah back in Provo, but we'll start the series back in Salt Lake. The Big 12 is going with this 5-4 scheduling home and away. And so this year, BYU has 4 home Big 12 games. Next year, they'll have 5, and then we're kind of switch back and forth from 4 to 5. Let me read off what I see as BYU's pod per se, even though it's not we don't know that it will be a pod going forward. But like you mentioned, we get Utah every year, home and away, home and away. We have Arizona, Arizona State, Kansas, and UCF. We have those 4 teams 3 out of the next 4 years, which to me, Arizona and Arizona State makes sense. They're more of like a regional game that could blossom into some sort of regional rivalries. In my mind, regional rivalries are what make college football. But interestingly, we play Kansas 3 the next 4 years, and we already played them this year. And we play UCF 3 the next 4 years. So I know a lot of Cougar fans are going to be planning some trips to Disney World.
Yeah, something that did surprise me, because we did get the next 4 years. We only played Colorado, Coach Prime, 2 out of the next 4 years. And like you said, a regional rivalry, they're really, really close geographically. I'm surprised we don't play them more. But yeah, I think the Arizona State, I think those are going to be really, really fun games. And historically, and I could be wrong, this is just a gut feeling, I feel like we've done really good against both teams historically.
Yeah, BYU's played well of late against the Pac-12. We played Arizona a couple times. We played Arizona in a neutral site game at the Cardinal Stadium down there in the Phoenix area as well. If you remember, that was when we hit the field goal to win the game. Help me out. The kicker, he had the yellow cleats. His name's Jake Oldroyd.
Yes,
Jake Oldroyd, his freshman year, the first game of the season.
I thought he was going to be an all-time kicker at BYU.
I believe
he hit that.
I believe it was 17-16, and that was the first. I think it was the first college game of his life, and he goes and hits that field goal.
I remember it.
Yeah, that was a good moment. So yeah, we have had some fun games. We played Arizona also at the Raiders Stadium at Allegiant Stadium in Vegas just a couple years ago, and that was a good game that BYU pulled out as well. So.
Yeah, as far as schedules, I don't think there's anything else we need to touch on. Obviously, as the years go on, we'll touch on more. But yeah, to your point, we play Utah every year for the next 4 years from here on out, which is really, really exciting.
I will say some fans are disappointed. I understand the sentiment that, BYU, 4 or 5 months ago, we thought we were getting into the Big 12 to play Texas schools. And it looks like each year we only have 2 Texas schools on the schedule. Texas obviously is a hot spot for high profile recruits. There's a lot of church members in Texas as well. And so was a little bummed to see not a ton of Texas schools on the schedule. But BYU will have, some more regional games and continue to visit Florida, right? UCF. There's also a lot of good high school players in Florida. And so that could be a good opportunity for the Cougars as well. So looking forward to the schedule. It's exciting to be on the in crowd, right? We're not on the outside looking in anymore.
Yep.
Here we are in the Big 12.
So we got maybe a minute and a half left. Final predictions this weekend.
This weekend, BYU goes to Morgantown, and I think because of the switch at quarterback, things get a little off to a shaky start. That's my prediction. I would love it if it went the other way, if we drove down and scored. The line's at 11. Like last week, I'm going to say BYU covers but does not win the game. I hate to pick against them, but going to a place like Morgantown where it's a hostile environment, let's go West Virginia 27, BYU 21.
Wow, so our predictions are always right next to each other. I also hate picking against BYU. Excuse me. I hate picking against them, so I won't. I have BYU taking this game 28-24.
Love it.
In a game that they actually get out to a crazy hot start. I think the score is going to be 21-7 going into halftime, and we do just enough in the second half to get the win. BYU becomes bowl eligible this weekend. West Virginia does not, and we're going into the next week happy because we have an all-inclusive trip paid for.
I love it. Yeah, so West Virginia, the second best chance we have of getting bowl eligible. I'll run through the FBI numbers here. West Virginia, they're giving us about a 29% chance this week. I like our chances better than 29%. That's what the models are predicting. Then we take Iowa State at home, 4-10 shot of winning that game. Again, I think more like a 60% chance. Oklahoma's bumped up since their loss. They give us a 10% chance at home against the Sooners.
Huge.
And then finishing in Stillwater, still about a 1-4 chance. Overall, 7-10 chance at getting to a bowl game for BYU. And let's see it happen this Saturday. Wouldn't that be fun?
It's going to happen this Saturday. You heard it here first. 28-24, BYU becomes bowl eligible. That's been it. We'll be back here on Monday, I believe, for a review of the game that we had and then a slight preview of the game the next week. But this has been it for the STLK in the UTA Cougars podcast.